Hello, welcome to our second winter webinar series for 2026. And today we're talking all about maximising fruit quality. We've got two great speakers today, Georgia Haenke from Hort Innovation and Mark Loeffen from Delytics. So I'm really excited to walk through all about consumer standards, maximising fruit quality and understanding where our fruit is ending up in market. I'd just like to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting on today, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm zooming in today from Wiradjuri land. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you were not on our webinar from last week, but if you have any questions or comments or would like to make a statement for our presenters, can you please use the Q&A function or the raise hand function in the webinar. We'll have an opportunity for questions for both Georgia and Mark after their presentations. And last week we actually had some people come off mute, which was great because that means we're a little bit more interactive. So if you're feeling a little bit bold, jump off mute and ask your question as well. But as I mentioned, this is part of a webinar series. Hopefully you've seen all the comms that Geets has put together for all of us over the last few weeks. But we had a webinar recording 2 weeks ago on the 2nd of July looking at improving pollination. I really recommend all of you visiting that before you start the season because our presenters went through looking at hive health and understanding how you optimize your pollination during those critical periods. So you can jump on the CGA YouTube channel, which I might get Geets to pop the link in the chat, and you can watch that recording now. So this is our Maximising Fruit Quality webinar, and then we'll move on to improving cherry production in changed environments, where we've got a really good lineup of speakers for that. And then finalising on the 5th of August, our webinar series, we have training and canopy systems. And at the moment, I'm actually talking to some of our Kiwi counterparts to bring us some information from New Zealand in that webinar. So really looking forward to presenting those to you as well. So make sure you register for all the sessions. It's much better if you come live. We prefer if you want to join us in person, but understand that it is a little bit of a busy time getting prepped for the season. So all the webinars are recorded and you can go back and watch them at your leisure as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to pass on to our first speaker, who is Georgia Haenke from Hort Innovation. Georgia is the Category Performance and Insights Manager, and she's here to talk about an overview of how the cherry category performed over the last season with market and consumer insights to help you all understand what's happening with the category, consumer behaviour and opportunities for the season ahead. Georgia, do you want to share? Oh, look, or you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Jess. Fantastic. Thanks for the great introduction. So for the next 20 to 25 minutes, I'll be taking you through a short update on domestic insights for cherries. So today's session will be drawing on insights from multiple projects. They are multi-industry strategic investments that are funded by horticulture growers and the Australian government. And you can check out the full insights behind all of these programs on Hort IQ. So today I'll be taking you through some high-level consumer trends and supply insights before we dive right into the retail performance for cherries and their usage and perception insights as well. And then we'll wrap up at the end and we should have some time for some questions as well. So before diving into consumer insights for cherries specifically, I just wanted to briefly ground us in some of the broader consumer trends that are shaping fruit purchasing overall at the moment. So there are 3 key social trends that we are going to discuss today. So the first one is unsurprisingly about cost of living. So cost of living is still the #1 concern for Australians. And as a result, consumers are keeping a closer eye on what's going into their baskets. They're looking for value and they're also being more selective with their purchases. And secondly, those cost of living pressures are also having a clear impact on eating out, with nearly half of Australians now saying that they're dining out less often as a result of cost of living pressure. And so eating out occasions are now moving back into the home there. And then thirdly, there's been a shift towards something we're dubbing snackification, particularly amongst younger consumers. And so this is just where there's an increased frequency in snacking and less reliance on traditional meal occasions. And so this trend becomes important later on when we look at cherries, which we will see performs particularly well within the snacking occasion. And now moving into our top 3 retail trends. So these are pulled from Nielsen IQ's retail wrap-ups, and they're released every quarter and available on Hort IQ. So the first one is fresh produce is experiencing stronger inflationary pressure than total grocery overall. And so what that's doing is creating a more competitive environment for shopper attention. And secondly, while major supermarkets are, of course, the dominant channel, the strongest growth is actually coming from both online and discount retailers. So it's just making them an increasingly important channel to win within. And then lastly is the value-seeking behaviours we're seeing is also driving more consumers to shop around. So nearly 60% of households are now purchasing across 4 or more retailers. And so what that means is that rather than relying on one main shop, consumers are increasingly spreading their spend across multiple retailers in search of that best value. And so to put that all together, what this means is that cherries simply have to work harder to earn their place in the basket in this context. So while the category does align well with trends like snacking and at-home consumption, shoppers are more selective than ever at the moment. And so it just makes visibility, availability, and perceived value as well increasingly important for cherries to earn their place in the basket. Okay, so now I'll take you through a brief overview of supply insights for cherries. So this is a supply snapshot from the latest Hort Stats handbook release, and it uses data up till June 25. So in total, nearly 20,000 tonnes of cherries were produced, with the majority of that going into fresh supply. And then from there, retail is by far the dominant destination, and that accounts for around 83% of fresh volume. And I will just say that while food service does play a slightly larger role for the category compared to fruit overall, cherries remain fundamentally a retail-led category. And ultimately, that's a pretty encouraging position for the category, given we are seeing more eating occasions shifting back into the home, which is where most cherry consumption will be taking place. Okay, so this section looks at retail performances using the Nielsen IQ home scan data. So the home scan utilises a continuous panel of about 10,000 Australian households. These panel members take home they record all of their take-home grocery purchases across all Australian retail outlets, and the data is nationally representative by age, gender, and location. And the data we've pulled for today is using a rolling 24 weeks, or roughly 6 months, and so it's covering the full cherry season from October to March. So to kick off this retail section, I just wanted to start by looking at how the most recent season progressed and how consumers engaged with cherries over the time. So this chart shows household penetration on a rolling 4-week basis. So it's the proportion of Australian households that bought cherries within that 4-week bucket. And we can see this season versus last season and 2 seasons ago. And what we can see quite clearly is that there was a bit of a slower start to the season, with the penetration numbers sitting below the previous couple of years in November. However, from December onwards, you can see that that penetration began to recover, and that by the end of the season, particularly in February, we actually saw a really strong finish, and that really helped make up for that earlier shortfall. And so overall, while the season did start later, the engagement with the category caught up as the season progressed. Okay, so now to zoom out, we can look at how cherries' retail performance has tracked over the last 5 seasons. So these 3 charts are showing retail value, volume, and average price. And starting with the chart on the left, you can see that the retail sales have steadily increased, and they're now reaching their highest level in the last 5 seasons. And in the chart over, you can see the retail volumes have followed a very similar trajectory and have also reached a 5-year high within the latest season. And then finally, with price on the right, you can see that it's currently sitting at around $15.60 a kilo. And while that is up 2.6% on last season, it's still well within the range we've seen over the last few seasons. So I'd call that relatively flat. And so overall, cherries have delivered a really strong season, And in fact, it's performed higher than the fruit average overall. And I'd say it's one of our best performing commodities recently. And so I guess the next step to this is to understand what's driving that really strong growth. So this slide looks at how households are engaging with cherries, and it breaks this down into 3 key measures. So we've got household penetration, frequency, and basket size. So if you're reading this from left to right, you can see that roughly 40% of Australian households bought cherries over the season. Each of those households purchased cherries about 3.4 times on average, and they bought just under 700 grams each trip. Now, while all 3 household metrics have increased compared to last season, it's actually occasions per buyer that really stands out. So it's that chart in the middle. And you can see that occasions per buyer has increased by nearly 12% compared to last year. And it's that uplift in frequency that's what's driven that really strong growth in retail value and volume that we saw on that previous slide. And so from here, we'll be digging more into what occasions and frequency of purchase mean. So this chart shows the breakdown of cherry buyers by how many times they purchase cherries across the season. So it separates the buyers who purchase just once versus twice, 3 times, so on. And what really stands out here is the clear strengthening in repeat purchasing. So if we look back to the first column, you can see that 54% of cherry buyers were repeat buyers. So that just means they bought cherries 2 or more times over that season. But if you compare to now, so the column on the far right, you can see that that has increased to 60%. And we're seeing not only growth in the number of repeat buyers, but we're also seeing growth at the higher frequency end as well. So it's especially among the buyers who were purchasing cherries 5 or more times that we've seen a really strong increase for. And so that shift towards higher frequency purchasing is what's underpinning that growth we've seen at the retail level. And so this just reinforces that cherries are doing a really good job of building up a base of more regular repeat buyers. Okay, so now shifting into shopper demographics. This slide looks at how cherries are performing across different life stages. So on the left, we have a share of volume, and on the right, we have the change in volume compared to last year. And what we see is that cherries tend to over-index with senior couples and independent singles. So what that means is that we do particularly well with those cohorts. However, the key takeaway I'd like for you to have from this slide is around families who are underrepresented within the cherry category. So you can see family households contribute to around 35% of total fruit volume, but only around 24% for cherries. And if you see on the chart on the right, there are some positive signs of growth. So you can see bustling families and small scale families have seen some decent growth compared to last year, but there is still a gap to close in building relevance with these households. And this is particularly important because we tend to eat the foods that we grow up with, and so purchasing habits are often formed quite early. And so there's a real opportunity to build stronger engagement with families, which will help to drive not only current demand, but then also the long-term category growth as well as those shoppers continue through and age into adulthood. Okay, so now shifting to retailer performance. This is a really similar view, but we're just looking at where cherries are being purchased. So if we look at the chart on the left, we can see that, again, unsurprisingly, major supermarkets remain by far the largest channel for cherries. They account for around 65% of cherry volume sold. This is followed by non-supermarkets at 21% and other supermarkets at 14%. And now if you look to the chart on the right, which shows the volume growth or volume change compared to last year, what really stands out is just the strength of the majors. So they delivered a 27% volume growth, and that means that they're significantly outperforming both the fruit average and the cherry total market growth as well. And so overall, major supermarkets really do remain the key channel for cherry sales, and it makes strong execution, visibility, and availability within these retailers in particular very important for the cherry season. Okay, and this is the last retailer slide from me. So this one is focusing on online performance. So this slide shows the online value share of trade for both fruit overall and cherries over the last 5 seasons. And what we can see is that cherries continue to sit below total fruit in terms of online share. So you can see total fruit is sitting at 8%, while cherries is about 5%. And while there was some growth over the last couple of years, the growth for cherries in this channel has started to plateau recently. And this is particularly important because of two reasons. Firstly is that we know from our broader consumer trends that online is continuing to be an important channel. It's growing. And secondly, it's also online is a channel that tends to be more relevant for family households in particular. And so continuing to build presence and visibility online is an opportunity not only to grow within the channel itself, but to also help engage more of our family shoppers as well. Okay, so next up is our usage and perceptions insights. But before I do dive into that, does anyone have any questions, or I can go straight into it? Cool, okay. So this next section is looking at our consumer usage and perceptions using our tracking data from 55.5. So this is a tracker, it's a monthly online survey. It collects responses from about 800 Australians each month. And the data is again nationally representative by age, gender and location. And similarly to the previous section, this data also covers the 6 months from October to March. So it's just under 5,000 responses in total. Okay, so this slide looks at purchasing intent and recent purchasing for cherries compared to other fruit. And what we're seeing here is that cherries are rarely top of mind. So only around 4% of consumers say that they're planning to buy cherries without any prompting. And that is behind most of our other key competitors here. However, when consumers are prompted, you can see that that intent does lift to 12%. And so that just really highlights the importance of visibility and reminders in store for the category. And moreover, we also see that nearly 1 in 10 consumers claim to have bought cherries in the past week. And what I'd like you to focus on is that conversion between purchase intent to purchased. That's at 67%. And that is actually very similar to the mangoes conversion. And so while mangoes do benefit from just higher awareness overall, cherries actually convert just as efficiently once they're top of mind. So once people do intend to buy cherries, they're quite likely to follow through. And so it just really reinforces that the bigger opportunity here sits earlier in the funnel, and it's about lifting awareness and prompting consideration, and they're likely to be the two biggest levers we can pull to drive demand. And now this slide shows the exact same 3 metrics, but now it just focuses on cherries and it shows how they've trended across the season. And so the key takeaway here is that the demand is heavily concentrated around the Christmas period. So you can see all of the metrics are building up towards that clear peak in December before they start to decline through the remainder of the season. And I know this won't be particularly surprising to anyone, given the very strong association between cherries and Christmas. But it does just highlight that a large proportion of the category demand is highly concentrated within a relatively short time frame. And so the opportunity here is to extend that peak out as much as possible. So if we can build demand in the shorter months either side of Christmas, we can help extend the season and create more purchasing occasions for consumers. And then this will ultimately help drive additional cherry volume. Okay, so now this slide shifts to when and how cherries are consumed. So as I alluded to earlier, snacking is clearly cherries' core occasion. It accounts for around 3/4 of at-home consumption. And moreover, if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that cherries are most often eaten fresh and on its own, which reinforces its role as a simple high-reward snack. And so both of these insights together are really encouraging given that wider consumer trend of snackification, where there's that shift towards more frequent snack-based eating. And just before I move on, I will mention that cherries also over-index in dessert occasions. And so that just highlights an additional area where the category already has a natural strength and could be further broadened into over time. And so the next question is, what are consumers actually looking for when they buy cherries? So this slide looks at the factors consumers associate with cherries and what drives choice relative to other fruit. So starting with the drivers of purchase on the left, you can see that seasonality and being a treat are the strongest reasons people buy cherries, which reinforces just how closely tied the category is to special occasions. And on the chart on the right, we can see that cherries are very strongly associated with being delicious, easy to eat and healthy, factors which all fit really well within the snacking occasion. At the same time, though, cherries do strongly over-index on both premium and expensive associations. And so this just reinforces their positioning as a high-value treat. So it's something consumers are willing to pay more for, but it can also help explain why price can become a barrier, which we'll be looking more at on this slide. So now this slide looks at the key barriers to cherry purchase. So this analysis focuses on recently lapsed cherry buyers. So it's those that have previously bought cherries in the past 12 months, but didn't buy them within the latest season. And so if you look at the chart, we can see two barriers clearly stand out. Unsurprisingly, expense is the number one barrier, with over half of buyers citing this as a reason for not purchasing. And given the broader cost of living pressures, price sensitivity does continue to be a key challenge for most of our commodities just in general. And the second barrier there is seasonality, with more than a third saying cherries were not in season. And I'd just like to really emphasize here that the data covers December to February, so it was taken definitely within the cherry season. And so this just suggests that consumer perceptions of availability may not always align with when cherries were actually in market. And so I'm going to unpack both of these barriers a little more over the next couple of slides. And we'll be starting with value and price perceptions here. So this slide looks at a set of consumer metrics that can help us understand perceptions of value. So what we're showing here is a comparison between a year ago and the most recent season. And starting on the left, you can see nearly a quarter of consumers who bought cherries this season said that they were definitely worth what they paid. And while this does still very slightly under-index to fruit overall, it does represent an improvement, with the previous two seasons just sitting at 20% to a little above 20%. And at the same time, the other two charts, you can see that love and satisfaction with cherries both continued to perform very strongly, and both over-index compared to fruit. And so our price does remain the number one stated barrier. Perceptions of value are moving in the right direction, and people are really enjoying cherries, and that strong eating experience plays a very important role in justifying the price and reinforcing those perceptions of value. So we just need to continue to build confidence that cherries are a premium product and that they're worth the price as well. Okay, and this is the last chart from me today. So this slide is looking at the monthly trend of consumers who cited not being in season as a reason for not buying cherries in the past 2 weeks. So I'll just flag up front that when we cut this data by month, the sample sizes are smaller. So the figures here, please just use them indicatively only. And the main focus here is mostly the overall pattern over the last 2 seasons. And so what we can see is that very clearly across both this and the season before is that during December, around a tenth of consumers said that they didn't buy cherries because they thought they were out of season. And so that just tells us that for the most part, consumers tend to understand cherries are available during the Christmas period. However, outside of the Christmas peak, that figure quickly jumps back to around a third and at times closer to a half of consumers. And so that just suggests that the seasonality barrier is less about actual availability and more about consumer awareness and consideration. So the opportunity here is to continue building visibility and reminding consumers that cherries are available beyond Christmas and really help extend those purchasing occasions outside of that December peak. Okay. And now to wrap everything up, this slide brings everything together into 3 key areas for strategic shifts. So the first is around continuing to strengthen value perceptions. So we can see that cherries are already moving in the right direction here. The perceived value has strengthened compared to last year, and cherries also strongly over-index on premium associations. However, it's important to continue reinforcing this, particularly if the cost of living concerns remain elevated later on in the year when the next season starts to ramp up. And the second and third shifts are closely linked, and they both center on awareness and seasonality. So we know from our awareness slides that conversion from prompted intent to purchase is already really strong, which tells us that once cherries come to mind, people are very willing to buy. However, the challenge is that cherries don't often come to mind. So we really need to continue building that top of mind awareness, and this needs to be done particularly outside of December. And then that leads us straight into our final shift, which is about extending occasions outside of Christmas. So we've already seen some really encouraging progress here as well, with our purchasing occasions per buyer increasing across the season. And the opportunity now is to build on that momentum by increasing visibility, reminders, and prompts in those shoulder months in particular, while also continuing to address seasonality perceptions and knowledge gaps as well. And so together, these three shifts are about ensuring cherries feel premium and worth paying for. They're top of mind when the season arrives. And then they also maintain relevance across more of the season as well, not just at Christmas. And finally, if you'd like to explore any of these insights in more detail, please feel free to visit Hort IQ. It's free to register and it provides access to our 2 dashboards, along with seasonal reports and category deep dives. So I'd really encourage you to jump on and explore the platform if you haven't already. And with that, thank you very much for your time. And I think we're ready to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Georgia. That was really interesting. And I think as an industry, we probably have a little bit of work around that education around seasonality. I mean, more and more we're seeing more fruit available earlier, so in that October to November period, and then also with all of our later season fruit in Tasmania coming on in that January, February period. So as an industry, I think we do need to have some work on driving that education and awareness around those seasons.
Yeah,
we've just got a question in the chat from Russell. Does the variation of maturity and colour in the pack in the supermarket affect sales and eating satisfaction compared to the more uniform maturity in the pack from the supermarkets now from the USA? So I think it's a lot of the fruit that we see that we're importing is quite uniform, and maybe that's not reflected as much domestically.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I don't think any of the data I specifically have access to answers that directly, but I imagine it would be. Mark, would you know more about that? You're kind of in that space a little bit more.
I'll be talking a little bit about that, Georgia. So
yeah, that was a good lead in.
Stay tuned, Russell.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other comments or questions for Georgia? And feel free, you can pop in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand as well. But while we're waiting, Georgia, I have a question around, you spoke about influencing young people to eat cherries. Now, is that something that Hort's looking into, or how is a sector are we going to target young people in improving our eating of cherries?
Yeah. I think the key strategy for us is more targeting families, because young people don't really tend to have too much of an influence. Oh, actually, no, you do have little kids that can nag their parent for something, but generally it's about targeting the parents and trying to position things as a family-friendly option, something to enjoy together with everyone. Yeah, so I think it's more about the family perspective than just young people specifically. Yeah.
Mark?
Georgia, I was interested in your not in season, how the consumers are saying not in season. What we've tended to find with that sort of thing is they have a negative eating experience and they say, oh, this fruit doesn't taste any good, therefore it's not in season. So it's not necessarily with the availability of the fruit, it's just their taste experience. And if they've had a negative taste experience, that is one of the very common comments that comes out of that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. If it's not a good piece of fruit, then the easy blame is that it must just be an early piece or late piece. It's not actually from within the season itself.
And that just exacerbates the need for maintaining good quality the whole way through season, and really ensuring that early season fruit, if it is the first fruit on the market, that it's of the highest quality that it can be. I was thinking as well, when you were talking about influencing families, I guess that's the role of agritourism too. And now that we're seeing more and more of that, inviting, pick your own and encouraging people onto orchards and doing that whole tourism space as well, also engages more families. It's a fun day out, and I was just thinking around how we might be able to improve that as well. But yeah, if anyone else has any other questions, Georgia will still stay online. So if you've got one, feel free, again, comment in the chat, or we can revisit it when we come back from Mark. But Mark, I might get you to share your screen. So those from the conference would have met Mark from Delytics, and he is going to talk about the latest insights, a little bit different to what we spoke about at the conference, but looking into what the research is revealing around the Fruit Quality Project and how Australian fruit is performing in supermarkets. So thank you, Mark.
All good. Is that okay now? You can see what?
That looks good.
You can see. Cool. Okay. Welcome everybody, and let's get into this. Basically, why does cherry maturity need to improve? Or one of the things that that Georgia showed, that some people are disappointed and therefore assuming that the fruit isn't in season. So we help primary industries basically increase consumer demand and value. That's what we do, and we do this so that we work right from the consumer back to the grower and everything in between. And from our perspective, we've worked with, I don't know, we lost count of how many fruits we've worked with. So I said to George earlier that we'll take you through a typical consumer buying experience. So the very first thing that consumers consider, and that might be subconscious, but when there's needles and strawberries and people saying they bought mushrooms from the supermarket that killed people, that they very negatively influence the perception about safety. The next thing is about the condition of fruit. So the fruit is actually sitting in a supermarket display and it's got to get into your trolley. So then we're looking at the condition of the fruit. Does it look good? Color, size, firmness. That's where uniformity of color, uniformity of size, and that is comes into it. And then finally, if it gets into your supermarket trolley, you take it home. What happens next is your taste experience determines what happens next. So your eating experience directly influences your repurchase intent. So if you're consistently positive, and I heard the comment earlier on about getting it right from Jessica from the beginning of the season, absolutely critical. Inconsistent eating experience, so good one time, not so good the next time, increases the risk and decreases your potential to repurchase. Price is also a proxy. The more you like it, the more it performs, you will pay more for it. And consistently good eating fruit just goes to the top of the list. So we'll just look at how consumers respond to that. So if consumers purchase once a week, if they've had a great eating experience, they'll repurchase the same amount. If not, they're out for 6 weeks. And after a negative experience, they still require 2 or 3 more eating experiences, positive eating experience. So if we look at this from the perspective of 100 consumers get there in the first week, and if 60% of the fruit is acceptable, then 60 consumers will come back the next week. The rest are out for 6 weeks. So the following week, 60% of those come back. And so this is the orange graph. The green graph shows 80%. And the difference between that, just between 60 and 80%, is about a 50% increase in demand. So it's massive. You know, even 10% is about a 25% increase in demand. So what we were looking at is we're wanting to monitor fruit at retail and wholesale to develop and support the adoption of minimum quality standards and basically help the industry increase their performance. The basic theme is a rising tide lifts all boats. So what did we do? We monitored fruit at retail, export and wholesale, and we made those results available online. And we ran a consumer taste panel because on one hand, we want to see what's available to the consumer. On the other hand, from the taste panel, what should we actually be presenting to the consumer? So let's look at, we monitored slightly slow start this season because of contracting and that. So we did through most of December through to end of Feb. So our team measured 215 cherry samples from Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. Each entire sample was assessed for fruit condition, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. 10 cherries from each sample were individually measured for brix, acid, firmness and tasted as well. And so overall the team measured and tasted over 2,000 cherries. So that's a bit of a mission to do all that. And those de-identified results are available on the CGA website. So in terms of fruit condition, 55% of all cherry samples contained major defects. But if we look at the graph on the right, you'll see that if we say the threshold's at 10%, then 90% of the samples had less than 10% major defects. The other 10% were anywhere between 10% and 60%. So bruises was the most common, physical damage as well, and many of these records contain multiple defect types. So then if we look at minor defects, so nearly 87%, pissing was the most common, stem marks, cosmetic damage. Again, if you look at 10% as a threshold, sort of 70 to 80% were okay, and that went up to 80% for one sample. The question you might ask is, what do we do about that? Well, every sample that we can identify with a grower, a report was sent to Penny, and she passed that on to the grower concerned. So each of these growers was notified of that situation. So we were also looking at the fruit maturity. We needed to look at standards, and so we used the current industry standards for that. And here's just a big picture of the whole season. So 2,000 cherries on the top upper left picture, and at the bottom left you can see what percentage were greater than 15 brix. So the average of all that was 92%. So from my perspective, this was a pretty darn good season. I've seen seasons much worse than this. Firmness was good. Acid was also good. Moving on. Looks at retail and wholesale. This is very standard. We do lots of fruit monitoring. We've been doing that for well over a decade. And so what we tend to see generally is wholesale is higher than retail. We did this by the state of purchase. And so you can see that still wholesale, except for Queensland, wholesale outperformed retail. If we look at by variety, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. You see the odd variety that had one sample and 0%. Well, I'm not going to say that that's a bad variety. That's just the way the data is. But you can see for Loeffens, for example, 54 samples, 93%. At the other end, unspecified, which will be the retail fruit, 52 samples, 94%. So overall, not a huge difference by variety. So now we're going to move on to the sensory panel work that we did at Werribee, where the study was conducted in late January, mainly on Loeffens, because that's what we're asked to do. And basically, this was all done properly with very strict scientific precision. The panel was 113 regular consumers, and 2/3 of those were ate cherries multiple times per week. So each consumer tasted 10 cherries, and for each of those we measured the colour, the firmness, and bricks and acid, and as well as the overall flavour and texture scores. I'm just going to show you a video just to give you an impression of what these scientists went through and what it's like to work in one of these laboratories. So here is a person measuring cherry colour on both sides of the fruit. You'll see the little flash there. The next person then measured firmness. This one person measured firmness on 1,130 cherries. This is very much a production line. So they've got their systems and their methods. Then once the firmness is measured, it dents one side of the cherry. So then they cut it in half, and half goes for tasting and the other half goes for further testing. So this is the inside of the sensory panel. So there are 10 booths with a little, there you go, a little slider. So the person is told sample 1, score that. And this goes through, score sample 1. And so none of the consumers can see each other. And it was done under a white light. So here are the consumers there in their little booths. Sometimes we did discuss doing it under red light. If you do it under red light, then they can't see the color of the fruit. And so the next thing is with the other half of the cherry, we're measuring the bricks. And so then suck some of that juice out. And then this is the acid measuring process. So the juice has to be diluted in weighed, and this is a very exacting process that the person spends a lot of time on. That I'll move forward because it takes a long time. And ultimately what this is about this person eating it, having a wonderful eating experience. So we'll move on from that. So how do they score? They score using a 9-point scale where you'll see all the scores 6 and above have a like in front of them, the 4 and below have a dislike in front of them, and the 5 is neither like nor dislike. So then we also look at this concept of acceptance, which is the total likes over the total tastes. And we're suggesting that we want 80% of consumers to have a positive cherry eating experience. So here are 1,130 flavor likings and bricks readings. And so there's a red line at 6 saying we want to be above that. We've got a couple of models which we won't go into a lot of details, but sort of on average, people are scoring 6 around about 14. But that's average, and that's a sort of a 50-50, you know, I can take it or leave it. So let's look at the acceptance. Now we see the models going through 80% acceptance at 16 bricks. So that is now something that is very well grounded in Australian consumers. Also, if we look at firmness, we've got the Sure at the bottom and the FirmTech at the top. So about 55 Sure, the acceptance really drops off. So what have we learned so far? That bricks is probably the most important maturity measure. Acid, we found, wasn't really necessary for Loeffens. Firmness has a lower limit, and colour is also important, and the darker the better. So we've learnt that a bricks of 16 will achieve 80% consumer acceptability, but harvested cherries have variable bricks, and that's measured through a thing called standard deviation. And we looked at all the cherry samples from the inspections, and the standard deviations range from 1 to 4 with an average of 2. So if we look at that and that's the distribution at the bottom in the blue, if we have 80% of cherries greater than 15 with a standard deviation of 2, then we have an acceptance of 80%. So that's getting us into the right ballpark. So we want 80% of consumers to have a positive eating experience. We can do that if 80% of cherries have a minimum bricks greater than 15. And you saw from this season that was around about 90%. So overall, that was a fantastic experience. Acid wasn't necessary for Loeffens, but we've heard that there are some varieties that we might need to look at that more closely. So we won't be finalising anything until we do more on-farm work this year, especially associated with rain events. So how do we maximise fruit quality? We suggest you're regularly collecting data on your fruit maturity. So data, not just grab one and taste it and that looks okay. So we can help you with sampling protocols, measurement technologies, and even harvest prediction using models. And as Jessica said early, the key to this in all industries, especially seasonal industries, is to make sure the first fruit into the market eats really well, because those first consumers come in there, oh, that's good, I had a great taste experience, I'm happy to go back, there's no risk in me going back. So just to wrap up, thank you to Hort Innovation for funding this research. Rudge Produce Systems did a lot of our retail monitoring, and Cyro did our sensory science. But I want to finish off with one last slide that shows how New Zealand navel oranges are working. You can see before 2016, we come back to about 60% consumer acceptability. Since we put in some new standards and some new processes, it's never dropped below 80%. And over 6 of the last 11 years, I think 7 of the last 11 years, we're over 90%. So keeping that high gives consumers confidence. And we're at the point now in New Zealand navel oranges where you're almost at the point where you can't buy a bad navel orange when you go into the supermarket. And that's me. Thank you. Jessica, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. That was fantastic. Well done. You've definitely caused a stir in the chat. We've got lots of questions.
Great.
But first,
Shoot.
I accidentally missed Michael's just before on George's. So, Georgia, we might quickly just ask Michael's and then we'll move into yours, Mark. So, well, you spoke about the purchasing intent for cherries is so low compared to other seasonal fruit such as mangoes. Is that because mango season is longer, better awareness, or greater supply?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's probably just more aware, like I think Australians are just probably more aware and more across mangoes. Like the household penetration for mangoes, for example, over the season. For cherries, it's about 40%, and for mangoes, it's 60%. So it is just a more heavily consumed fruit in general. Yeah, I'd probably link it to that rather than supply, I guess. Although it does have a longer season, so that probably helps draw out those purchasing occasions a little bit more as well.
Can I talk to that as well? Mangoes are particularly interesting in that they start the season with a big bang. You know, there's a big media thing. This is the first season. the tray is sold, the first tray is sold for massive dollars and all the rest of that. So there's a huge media promotional campaign at the beginning of the mango season, which I think helps. And if those first fruit are good, that really sort of makes the season really, really flow.
Thank you both. Okay, so Mark, are these results transferable to overseas purchases from, oh, sorry, it's been edited. Sorry, Karina. It's for Georgia as well. Are the results that you saw, Georgia, transferable to overseas purchases from exported cherries as well, or is this just on the domestic market?
Yeah, so the data I was sharing today was heavily concentrated only between October to March. So that is pretty much just the Australian produce, but it is available across the whole year. So if you're interested in how exports perform, we can pull that data out, but this is only domestic.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Mark. Now is it for you?
Sure.
So a couple of questions and comments in the chat around the fruit that was sampled. Did you guys only target first grade quality fruit, or were you also looking at second grade in the market as well?
We weren't particularly targeting first grade or second grade fruit. We were specifically, when we do these taste panels, which is this with taste panels or for the
This is just for the data in general for both, I
yeah,
think.
for the data in general, no, we weren't. We were just targeting what was available. We had I think at the conference, there was some discussion about first grade and second grade fruit and whether that's even detectable at supermarkets. And we found that that's very rarely detectable at the supermarket. So no, we didn't particularly go out to target anyone, but I suppose most of the stuff would have been first grade fruit. But we did do wholesale and export as well. So, you take what you can get.
Would there be an opportunity to look at specifically second grades as well, if they were, advertised as purchasing seconds? Is that something the project could look at, or it's more walk into a store, it's a random sample of whatever is available on that day?
As I say, in stores, you probably won't see second grade fruit very often. But we're certainly not against that. It doesn't have to be first grade fruit, because the whole concept with going into the supermarkets and is actually what is in front of the consumer. What could the consumer purchase? So we're not fixated on it's only got to be first grade fruit.
Yep. Awesome.
But obviously we don't want to do all second grade fruit either.
No, exactly. Andrew Hall, why are people still growing Rons? I still like the humble Ron.
I've a sample of one, so let's.
So I've also got a question around variety labels. So are cherries now sold with variety labels, or can consumers understand what varieties they're getting from the supermarket? Someone's made the comment, not sure how much knowledge consumers have around cherry varieties relative to apples.
Yeah, apples are very focused on selling by variety. I think in cherries, if you look at Woolworths packs, they're just Woolworths packs. There's no variety information on it. So I haven't looked at that specifically, but generally, when we're purchasing from supermarkets, we don't know the grower, we don't know the variety, and that sort of thing. So we will just be purchasing out of the display.
I think what I've seen as well, even in the last growing season, a lot of businesses have done some work on social media, and I've been enjoying watching along the journey of some of the growers getting out into the orchard and spruiking certain varieties. And I think there is becoming a more of a shift around getting excited about certain varieties coming into season, and maybe that will also help in the extension of the cherry season, that if we've got these new varieties that are popping up, and people are getting excited over them. But I am seeing a little bit of a shift, even more so in the last season as well. But I guess, like you said, Mark, in the supermarkets, a cherry is still a cherry. And whether that
and that's
is
the challenge.
yeah, and whether that is, most beneficial for the industry or not, I'm not saying either way. I know the apple industry does have trouble now in terms of there's almost a saturation of varieties, and you don't eat pink ladies if you eat galas and things like that. So it is an interesting tightrope to walk. So watch
On the
this
flip
space, I
side,
think.
also, sometimes you can do it in the supermarkets. You can work on brand. And
Yeah,
if you have a
yeah.
recognizable brand and your brand performs, people will go to it, and people will purchase that brand and pay more for it by preference.
Yeah, and that's something that I know the cherry industry does quite well. We have got some significant brands that are circulating in the market as well.
Sure.
Just a couple more questions. Were the 10 cherry samples randomly selected, or did they include lightest to darkest in color in the in your cherry sampling?
Probably randomly sampled through the. We prefer with that not to. When we're asking people to sample, we want them to just take a sample without necessarily looking at the piece of fruit, because then the sample can become biased. I like that piece of fruit and I don't like the look of that piece of fruit, and that sort of thing. So we try and just say, just grab some fruit. Don't really look at it. Just select it randomly.
Yep, great. And with the sensory panel, were the cherries sourced directly from the growers or purchased from the retail?
A mix. So for the sensory panel, one of the things that we do with the sensory panel is we deliberately want to feed the consumers fruit that they're going to score a 1 on, dislike extremely. So we want to see the whole range of responses, because we want their response with the bricks and the acid and the color and that sort of thing. So we deliberately make sure that the panel has some fruit that they dislike and fruit that they like, so we get the whole range of experiences.
Almost like ground truthing.
Very much so, because people say, why do you give them fruit that they dislike? See, because we actually see that stuff in the supermarkets, unfortunately. And we want to know, when we see that stuff, what would the consumer reaction have been? So that is quite deliberate.
Any other comments or questions for this afternoon? We've just ticked over 3 o'clock. I'll allow any more. Tony, you've got your hand up. I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself. Maybe Geets, you might have to unmute him for us. Or maybe I can.
I've done that.
Perfect.
Should be able to speak now, Tony.
Thanks, Jess. I just can't get into the chat for some unknown reason. So I just, I'd be interested, because I've met Mark before in a previous life in citrus, and there was a lot of work done there. So it's a fair few years ago, Mark. And a lot of that work that was done, Jess and Mark, I'm interested in the protocol from the orchard, because we can set standards and have everything and what it should be. And we've just talked about second grade. Well, second grade should taste as good as first grade. It just doesn't look the same.
Agreed.
So they're the sort of things that you look at. But for me, is when can I make a decision to take the fruit off the tree, and the protocols that you would have in place, so you do that as effectively every time. So your comments on that.
Happy to do that, Tony. Great question. We're just looking to extend this project at the moment with some work on farm, but fundamentally we've done this across a large number of crops now, and so we could give you a sampling protocol to say, how do you sample the fruit for a sample. So we'll give you a sample size and a sampling protocol for that, and a measurement protocol. So what to do with those fruit once you have that. We can also give you access to a cell phone app that you chuck the data in. It goes into our back-end system, and we have models that can predict harvest. So you just, take a sample, a couple of weeks or something like that before harvest, or 10 days before harvest, and we can give you an earliest harvest date back pretty much straight away.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. All right, guys, we might pull up stumps. Thank you very much to Georgia and Mark for taking their time this afternoon to do the presentation and answer all your fantastic questions. I really appreciate everyone coming online as well and taking time out of your day. Hopefully it was beneficial. If you're interested in the recording, Gita will have that up in the next couple of days or so, and we'll let you know via our little email out. But hopefully I will see everyone on the 23rd. We're going to be talking all things protected cropping and a couple of other new projects that have started within the cherry industry looking at managing in changing climate. So I'm really excited for those as well. Just a big thank you to Gita for setting everything up for us this afternoon, and hopefully you all have a good weekend. But enjoy yourself, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.